Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of the Theater Enthusiast podcast. We're actually not talking about theater. We are talking about the SAG-AFTRA strike. I myself, along I'm sure with many other people, are a little confused about some of the do's and don'ts of the strike, what should and shouldn't be done. And I reached out to my next guest in regards to it. And then I was like, just come on my podcast and talk about it. So please welcome my first guest back, actually. Austin Highsmith. Hey, girl.
Hey, I'm your first return guest. I'm so
You
honored.
are. I just realized, I knew that, but then I just realized that.
I'm
Yeah, I
so
feel like,
honored. This is so exciting.
yeah, there's like a heat wave in New York and I'm like sweating in my air conditioning already. Ugh. Anyway,
So yesterday, my husband just turned our AC off and didn't tell me. And I was like, what's happening? Did it break? And he's like, oh, it was making too much noise. And I'm like, what? So you would rather just sit in a puddle than hear the AC come on every couple of minutes? It doesn't make any sense to me, but
I will say though, sometimes it gets like really cold in my apartment, which is great. Maybe it's because I have a studio. And so there were maybe like 2, 3 hours where I actually didn't have it on, but I was like, I'm about to shower. I should put on my air conditioner as there's sirens going up 8th Avenue right now. New York. There it is. Yeah, it's going. Anyway, so thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And even before we started chatting on podcast, we were getting into it a little bit. Pretty much this interview or chat came about because I texted you about something in regards to something, which I don't really want to get into just in case of it's not really scabbing, but just in case of anything. Um, and I was like, hey, this isn't theater related, but if you want to come on and talk about the SAG-AFTRA strike, please do. Because even though this is a theater podcast, I'm sure those who have listened know I also chat with guests who have film and television backgrounds and chat with them about their background with that as well, because I'm also a big entertainment nerd. So let's just start with the basics. Why did this strike happen?
so honestly, the strike is a little bit overdue. We probably should have, well, if the pandemic had not been happening in 2020, there's a high likelihood that we would have kind of not agreed to that negotiation that was given to us. But because the pandemic was happening, there was a very high likelihood that if we did not accept the contract that was given to us, that there would be no sort of renegotiation, because at that time movie studios and movie theaters in general were just losing so much money. So we and the writers kind of did the same thing, where we were like, okay, we're going to agree to this. This is not ideal, but we want to keep our members working as much as possible during the global shutdown.
Yeah.
And so everybody did agree to that. But there were a lot of repercussions that started actually probably about a decade ago, because in 2013 is when Netflix first aired its first original programming, which was Orange is the New Black. And at that time, it was still considered new media. It was considered experimental. Nobody knew if it was going to work. It was just this whole wild, wild west. We can't pay people the standard rates that they're used to on network television because we don't have advertisements and we're not selling ad space. So therefore, we still don't know if we're going to make any money. So they were literally allowed to pay guest stars something like $100 a day.
Oof.
I mean, it's like below minimum wage for any state.
Yeah.
And they're working them 12-hour days. They're putting them on hold for really long periods of time without paying them for those holds. Because they're doing block shooting around the episode. And but everybody's really excited because they get to be a part of this highly acclaimed show that's award-winning, that has all these exciting new faces, and it's on this new platform and all this kind of stuff, right? So after they started to really get into the business of producing their own original content is when we really should have started to go, hey, you're making these exorbitant budget sized shows and movies, and so we need to be fairly compensated. This is no longer new media. This is actually pretty much standard television. And they're still today claiming, no, we haven't made any money. We are still it's still experimental. And yes, on the books, if you look at it, they're not making as much money as maybe Disney is on their standard productions or something like that, but they're still paying their CEOs hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you guys are not making any money,
Mhm.
enough that you can actually pay the artists that are making you any money, then you probably shouldn't be paying this one dude tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's one of the main issues that we're striking over is the streaming residuals. They are completely the AMPTP, and I should point out that the AMPTP is different from the producers. The producers are the ones that we work with day in and day out. They're the on the grounds people making things happen. These are the overarching producers of the all of the content, which is the corporate
So
conglomerates.
I wrote this down because I didn't know what it was. So AMPTP, Amazon, MGM, Apple, Disney slash ABC slash Fox, NBC Universal, Netflix, Paramount, CBS, Sony, Warner Brothers, Discovery, HBO. They're all committed to prioritizing shareholders and Wall Street. Yeah, I did a smidge
Yeah,
of research like that.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So there's
so
over
yeah.
300 AMPTP companies.
Oh wow.
Um, and they all are negotiating together, which also is difficult because they all have different interests.
Yeah.
Obviously, your CBS, your ABC, NBC, Fox, and the CW have different interests than Apple because Apple is making also phones and computers and iPods and AirPods and iPads and all this kind of stuff, and the same with Amazon is in the original content platform, but they're also shipping you your toilet paper. So it's very difficult because this is one of the very first negotiations where you have these giant corporations that are negotiating alongside the CBS Viacom, Paramount, because like now everything has come together. And that's another huge problem is that is it an antitrust issue?
Mhm.
Possibly, because we have these major companies that are kind of wielding all the power, and they're not worried about paying their bills because they have other sources of income. And meanwhile, the artists are the ones who are starving, and they've even said that they would like for us to starve and lose our apartments before they're willing to come back to the table, which is just so evil. But where one of the main things that we're striking over right now is number one, they're not releasing any of the data that says how successful the show is. It used to be based on the Nielsen ratings, and that's how the advertisers would decide how much they're going to be willing to spend per spot, per show. That's how much they would know how successful the show was, because they would be like, oh, this reached 8 million households on Thursday night, because there was no sort of DVD recording or a DVR recording. There was no on demand. There was no like dumped onto the streaming platforms the next day. It was like you had to go home at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night to watch Friends. When I
Mhm.
first moved to Los Angeles in 2003, I'm an old lady. I mean, that's what you had to do, or you had to like record it on your VHS.
Mhm.
Um,
I remember
and
those
so,
days too. So
yeah.
don't worry. I remember. You're not that old.
Thank you very much. But it was very easy to track all of that. And now the streamers are saying that it's proprietary information. And so they cannot possibly release any of the data. They do still say like, oh, this made it into the top 10. This was one of the like highest streamed shows ever. But the artists who make that show are not seeing any benefit from it. So for example, when we do a guest star on one of the big five, so CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, and the CW. It's a little bit less for Fox and the CW, which doesn't make any sense, but it's just a little bit less to be on those networks. For a primetime network guest star, top of show guest star, the actor would receive $9,800 to be on the show. That sounds like a ton of money, right?
Mhm.
We're lucky if we book one a year. So try, normal America living on $9,800 a year. It's not easy. Where we used to be able to make our money is on the residuals. Every time that show would re-air on network television, we would make like $3,800. So just around $4,000. It may be a little bit more now because of our old contracts. However, they no longer re-air anything on the actual networks, except for the CW sometimes does. Now they just dump it onto their streaming platform, and everybody can just watch it on demand or on the streaming platform instead of them
Well,
ever re-airing it.
quick question about that. So
Sure.
there are some shows that were on NBC and CBS that are also on other networks like Comedy Central or TBS or USA. So when it comes to being on a different network than it originally was, what would a residual look like in that instance?
So they break that down to re-airing it under syndication or under basic cable, and it depends on when the original show came out. Like, I'm still making more money right now for my co-star on CSI New York, which was my first ever job in Hollywood. Well, my first ever union job in Hollywood. So
Yeah.
my first ever co-star. So there's the different levels of appearances on a television show. Are you do a co-star, recurring co-star, which means that you're on more than one episode, but it's still a small role. One day guest star, which means that they like condense all of your scenes into one day's work. So whereas it used to be that $9,800, they
Mhm.
condense it down to one day's work and they pay you $1,500.
Hmm.
Terrible. Or the top of show guest star, which is the 9,800 number. Recurring guest star, it can either be a recurring one day or a recurring top of show, or your series regulars. Those are the people who are on every single episode, which we're going to also get to, like, what's happening in that space in just a second. I'm still making more money on my first ever co-star from 2005 than I am for top of show guest stars that I did within the last 4 years,
Wow.
because of the contract that they were under at that time, and because of where they're re-airing. So right now, for example, one of the major five can dump a show where I did a guest star
Mhm.
onto their streaming platform, even if they're selling ads on that streaming platform, which most of them are.
Mhm.
And I got a residual for $40, whereas normally it would be $3,800 or more. It's now $40. And they're claiming, well, we don't make as much off of those ads as we do on standard network. Okay, but is it 10%? Are you making 10% of what you used to? Because that's what you're paying us.
Yeah.
And we cannot possibly qualify for our health insurance. We cannot possibly pay our bills. I mean, for the first time since 2008, I'm working 4 jobs
Wow.
right now. And I love them all and I really enjoy them. I am exhausted. But I'm very fortunate that I actually get to still, I'm teaching acting, which I love doing. And I love still being able to work in my field. But I mean, for the first time in well over a decade, almost 15 years, I'm having to hold down other jobs to keep myself afloat. So that's one of the main reasons that we're striking, is streaming residuals. And they offered something really terrible and paltry as far as a raise in that area, because they're still claiming that they're not making any money off of it. So that's a huge issue. We're also fighting for our image and likeness over
Yeah.
AI.
That's the big one I've been hearing the most about.
Yes, I mean, and the writers are as well.
Mm.
And now they've added in that there's an AI casting app that will sort of like pull from your past performances to decide if you're right for a future performance. And it just takes all of like the humanity and the creativity completely out of it. Which is, so what they're trying to do with the writers, they're trying to have the writers agree to do rewrites on AI written scripts, because they know that they're not going to be any good. They know that they're not going to be usable. But all the AI is doing is pulling from previously created work. There's nothing original about it. Everything is just sort of a mashup of
Mhm.
what the AI bot has watched on XYZ channel, or from XYZ genre or whatever. And then they're trying to get a writer to polish it, to humanize it, and then they would make it. The problem is the residuals come from the creation of that intellectual property. And if that intellectual property is created by a computer, nobody owns that right except for the computer. I mean, except for the studios, the AMPTP companies, and the writer does not get any residuals. Because as it is right now, if you do a polish on something and you don't get a credit for it, which there's like a whole arbitration process through the WGA in order to get credit on something to be able to participate in the success of the project. If you don't get credit on it, you're never going to be able to participate on the success of that project. And similarly, what they're trying to do with actors, especially background actors, and this is one of the main reasons that our negotiating team was like, we are not accepting this offer, was that the companies were saying, we want to scan the background actors' image and likeness, like their whole body, for 1 day's work, 1 day's pay, and then be able to use that actor's image in perpetuity throughout all the studios, all the projects, everything. So the background actors, instead of working 53 days on a feature, would get 1 day's work forever. And you don't think about background actors a lot if they're doing their job correctly. Mm-hmm. But they fill out movies, they humanize movies, they make it feel, alive and active and vibrant and everything that makes a movie feel like real life. And that's our background performers. And so they're trying to completely eliminate them. And look, our negotiating committee isn't being unreasonable. They're not saying like, oh, if you're doing a stadium scene, you have to hire 18,000 background actors. They are willing to work with these studios and say like, okay, you have to hire this number of background actors if you have over this budget to meet our requirements. They're not saying like you can't use CGI, you can't use AI at all, but you also cannot own an actor's image in perpetuity and pay them for 1 day. Yeah. And also what they're trying to do with principal performers is bring old actors, back from the dead, use their performances, and like Marlon Brando could be starring in a movie again. And like without really paying him for that. Yeah. And they're trying to take all of our old performances and feed them into an AI machine. I don't understand technology. I mean, like, look, you and I, we can't even figure out how Google Docs work. But they're trying to feed it into this AI machine and allow it to generate new performances based on our past performances. And then like pay us a nominal fee. And that's just so disgusting. And it takes out everything that makes acting so moving for people when they watch it, because it's oftentimes a surprise. Like you can't take, somebody's performance in a past movie and just translate it directly into a new story, because that's not how that artist would have told that story. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge issue. Yeah. And, we're trying to raise, so there's something that's called a residual cap, where they will only contribute to your pension and health up into a certain capped point for that particular episode of television. So like if you do a primetime 1 hour network show, I think that the residual cap, or the earnings cap, I should say, is at $40,000 for that episode for its lifetime. That has not been raised since 1983. Wow. So in 40 years, we have not received a raise in that area. They also have not raised at all since, I think, 2003, something called Schedule F. So when you go do a big budget project, they can say, instead of paying you by the week or by the hour, which we do for normal people, we're going to pay you Schedule F. That means you get $65,000 for the entire thing, but you get no overtime, you get no holiday pay, you get no penalties. It's just, you agree to this and that's it. We have not received a raise in that area in 20 years. And based on inflation, it should be at least $100,000 already, if not more. Yeah. And they're unwilling to budge on that. I think that they gave us like a $10,000 raise or something. Oh, and by the way, with the earnings cap on the pension and health contributions, they agreed to give us a $5,000 raise on that.
Lovely.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just, there's a lot of issues, and, I've only touched on a couple of them,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of issues that we are finally going, nope, we're not going to put up with this. And I was actually really encouraged, because normally actors don't pay very much attention to their contracts. They don't pay very much attention to what's going on, because we don't have a lot of people who train us on how to run our own business.
Mhm.
I'm very fortunate that the school that I teach with, they allowed me to actually develop a class called The Business of the Business, where I like try to teach actors how to run their own small business, because that's really what we're doing. But actors are so scrappy. We're so determined to continue to do our art, no matter what the cost, that oftentimes we are working 4 or 5 jobs. I mean, I know I am right now, and I've been doing this for 20 years,
Yeah.
so there's not a ton of time and a ton of like bandwidth that the average actor is able to give to try to like really understand the nitty gritty. And the AMPTP companies have taken advantage of that for a really long time. So I was extremely encouraged that almost 50% of our membership turned up and voted in 98% support of the strike authorization vote. That's the highest percentage of participation that we've maybe ever had. Usually it's around like 13 to 20% engagement.
Yeah.
And also by far the highest strike authorization percentage as well. And that's varied, because SAG-AFTRA has 160,000 members. That includes like your news broadcasters who are on, your evening news. That includes dancers and stunt performers, and people who primarily do commercials or video games, or they joined, 50 years ago, and they did one job, but they continue to pay their dues because they want to get the screeners, or whatever the reason that they're still a member of the union. There's not a lot of active members still that engage in the votes, but I was really encouraged to see that there were so many that were like, no, we have had enough. And that's really encouraging.
Yeah. I also would just like to point out too that some there's been like, again, from what I'm seeing on social media, a lot of these like big name performers, they're coming out saying it's, but like Leslie Jones, she posted a really like awesome video. She's like, fuck all of you for like coming after me, saying like, why am I complaining about this? She's like, I'm fortunate. I didn't hit it big until I was like 47. But this strike is not about me. It's for the people, like the other people, because, that's like 1 or 2% of these like A-list celebrities. And you have like, 99 or 98% who are just working performers who are just doing this for a living. And, you don't know their name, or maybe you've seen them, or they're a background actor, or, like you said, they're stunt worker, they're voiceover, they're X, Y, and Z. So the strike is not about like the A-list. And yes, it is helpful that you're seeing them out there supporting SAG-AFTRA, but it's about the other people as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I think it's about 1% of our industry, or of our union, are
Mhm.
those top earners,
Mhm.
and that's a tiny, tiny percentage. Everybody else, for the most part, they're like me.
Yeah.
They're renting. They don't own a home. I mean, it's crazy to try to own a home in Los Angeles anyway, because it's like, do you have like $7 million that you're just like, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah, buy a house. Yeah.
Yeah, for like an 800 square foot closet.
Yeah. Same
But
with
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Same in New York. But I mean, it is a lot of people who are just the journeyman actor, who have to go in there and try to get every single job, auditioning, working as hard as they possibly can, probably holding down other jobs in the meantime. And those are the people that everybody is striking for. The middle class actor, the people that used to to be able to go on vacation once a year and go see their families, or eat out at a restaurant once a week, instead of being like, can I afford to buy celery this week?
Or so yeah.
Yeah. And so that's who we're striking for. I mean, I teach probably 100 students right now, and a lot of them, most of them are not in the union yet. I'm striking for their futures, so
Yeah.
that I can say I did everything that I could so that when you joined the union, you could actually make a living, and that this would not be gig work for
Mm,
you. This would not be another version of driving Uber,
yeah.
you know?
So, before we chatted, like now, nobody asked questions on my Instagram when I was like, ask me a question.
Yeah,
But you did mention that you had some students ask you questions. What are some of the questions that they did ask you? And if you can answer them if you haven't already.
sure. So a lot of them, as I mentioned, are not in the union yet, and they were really wanting to know, A, how do they support our efforts, and B, what can they and can't they work on? Um, so it's a little bit of a gray area on what they can't work on if, for example, a company is not completely honest that they do have any affiliation with the AMPTP company. But there's very little that we can do about that except for email SAG-AFTRA Strike at SAG-AFTRA.org to ask questions about a production. That particular email address is being farmed out to workers who know a lot about this. So it's not like you're necessarily reaching the people who are working on the negotiations, like on the, the lawyers and the staff, but they are people who know a lot about this and are going to answer you as soon as they possibly can. They're just completely underwater right now. But for example, if you go onto one of our casting sites and you see that Hulu is doing a non-union feature, that is considered struck work. That is something that a non-union actor should not work on if they ever want to become a member of the union. Or if you're a financial core actor, meaning that you've gone financial core so that you can work on both union and non-union projects. I don't like when people go financial core because it really undermines the union's efforts, and it really allows producers to profit off of union actors' image and likeness, but never pay that actor anymore. And so I have a really big problem with the actors not getting, they're not able to participate in the success of the project. And I think that they should be able to. So I personally would never go financial core, and I don't love it when people do, but I understand that some people are just absolutely desperate to work because they have to pay their families. But if you are a financial core actor or a non-union actor and you see something that is extremely obviously work for a struck company, you cannot do that, or else that's considered scabbing. If you are already in the union in the financial core position, you can be expelled from the union if they find you in violation. Or if you're a non-union actor and you work on that struck work, you can be prohibited from ever joining the union. So that's one of the main questions I get is, can I audition for this? Can I do this? And the answer is no for those projects. There are going to be projects that do not already have their distribution in the initial breakdown, but could possibly be for an AMPTP company. And that's going to be a little bit harder to determine whether or not you could or could not audition for that, because there is non-union work happening all over the place that then is later sold as an acquisition. And that, in that case, you would not be scabbing. You would not be in violation if you were to do a non-union movie that then 6 months from now, after they were done editing, was sold to an AMPTP company. But if it's extremely obvious that it is an affiliation with those, you should not do that. That is considered scabbing. And then also they're asking what they can promote. If they are a social media influencer who, has a huge Instagram following and they have been contacted by an AMPTP company to promote one of their summer movies, or if they're a SAG-AFTRA member who has gone to see one of these summer movies or has seen a television series that's on recently, what they can or cannot post about that. And that's all considered promotion if it's for a company that we're striking against.
Yeah.
Those people could be considered in violation or scabbing if they are a social media influencer who then wants to get into the union. Our chief negotiator and just incredible lawyer, Duncan Crabtree Ireland, has actually been personally reaching out to a lot of these influencers who have turned down huge sums of money from the struck companies saying like, no, I'm not gonna promote your movie because you need to pay your performers. So he's actually been personally reaching out to them and thanking them. The guy is a genius. He's just, I mean, such a rock star. And then so that's one of the other big questions that I'm getting. Oh, and then how they can support. They can join a picket. They can post about us on social media and say that they're supporting our fight. If they are financially well off and want to make a donation, the SAG-AFTRA Foundation or the Entertainment Community Fund are supporting. SAG-AFTRA Foundation only supports our SAG-AFTRA actors. The Rock made an enormous, very generous contribution a couple of days ago that will help 10,000 actors be able to pay their bills, which is just so incredible. The Entertainment Community Fund, and there's a couple of other ones, are helping everybody. Yeah. So if you want to help the members of the crew or, the writers or anybody who is fallen on hard times, you can donate there.
So, I mean, if you are a theater fan, you know what the Entertainment Community Fund is. It used to be the Actors Fund, now known as the Entertainment Community Fund, and they help people all throughout the entertainment industry, actors, front of house, back of house, opera, ballet, you name it, they are there to help. So, I mean, I'm well versed in the Entertainment Community Fund, having like worked on projects to help raise money for them, especially during the pandemic. So, I know that they do everything for everyone. So we also touched base a little bit about these waivers that some of the independent film companies are able to get. And I mentioned to you that I've seen on Instagram a couple of times how people have posted like A24 got these SAG waivers and they're able to, agree to SAG-AFTRA's demands, but these big companies can't. Do you want to talk a little bit? I mean, we did talk about it before we started recording, but if you want to talk about it a little bit more on podcast as well, just for those listening can understand like why certain actors are able to get these waivers to do certain films. Sure. Yeah.
So it's actually not a waiver, it's an interim contract. So that's one of the big confusion areas around it is that they're thinking that like we're waiving aside all of our demands when they've said like, because initially they were kind of using that terminology as well, and then they were like, no, what this is not a waiver, it's an interim contract. So they are actually signing on to agree to pay us everything that we had asked for, as far as raises, as far as residuals, as far as per diems, as far as like our overtime, and just everything that we had asked for. Like the last thing that we pushed across the table to the AMPTP saying, this is what we want. These companies that are truly independent, that have no fingerprint whatsoever from the AMPTP, meaning no financial contributions from, no affiliation with, no agreed distribution from any of these companies, as long as they can show that they have absolutely no affiliation whatsoever, they can be issued an interim contract as long as they agree to pay us and meet all of our last asked demands from the companies. And the reason that I sit on the low budget committee for SAG-AFTRA, so I really love that, especially our low budget contracts are part of this interim agreement or interim contract, because we don't want to hurt the people that are not doing anything against us. We want to make sure that they are the people who don't suffer, because they're oftentimes the ones who would the most, because they don't have this corporate conglomerate backing them and allowing them to continue to make their art. So we don't want to hurt the little guy. Also, we want to make sure that our pension and health funds stay afloat. There are still a lot of contracts that are not struck right now, which we can talk about in a little bit. But the more that you can really help contribute to our pension and health funds, the better it's going to be for all of our members that qualify. Only 13% of our members do actually qualify for health insurance right now. 87% of our members do not make $26,000 a year.
Wow, that's
that's
why they have 4 jobs.
Yes, that's why we have 4 jobs. Yeah. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I have, except for about 4 months out of my entire acting career, I have qualified for health insurance. And
Mhm.
also I have a husband who's an actor as well. So he qualified us forever. And so we're just on his plan, even though I qualified as well.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know that I will. I don't know that I will for the rest of this year. And so, it's a boat that I'm in as well, because, we've been out on strike for a while from the really high paying jobs, um, but that's okay. We will figure it out. We'll be fine. But, these interim projects these interim contracts that are being issued to the solely independent producers are helping to contribute to our pension and health. They're also helping our members. They're
Yeah.
helping our members qualify for health insurance. They're helping our members pay their bills.
Yeah.
And they're proving to the AMPTP companies that, hey, if A24 or this little independent production company who just managed to raise $5 million to get their film made, if they're able to pay our members what we're asking from you, who has a $300 million budget, you should also be able to meet these demands.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite parts about this, is that it's saying, like, hey, Mr. Disney, who flew to a billionaire retreat up in Sun Valley and said that we were being unrealistic, we're not. Because if like this small tiny company who nobody's ever heard of can meet these demands, probably Disney can too.
Yeah, a lot of the information I'm getting is social media, so I'm going to keep saying social media. I kept seeing something that says like if they give up like 2% of
Mm-hmm.
like what they make, it would cover so much, and that's only 2% out of like 100% of what they're making. So it's not really that big
Exactly.
of an ask, and to give up like 2% of your salary, like what do you need all that money for? Come on.
Exactly.
I mean,
I mean, I completely agree. And, I obviously wish that we lived in an altruistic society.
yeah.
That, however, is not the case. But,
I mean, I wouldn't
there's
complain if I had that type of money, but I also wouldn't like subject
hoard it.
performers
Yeah.
to like this stuff, just to be financially stable is all we really want, you
That's all
know?
we want. We just want to be able to pay for a place to live
Hmm.
and to be able to put food on our table,
Hmm.
and to not like wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning freaking out about how we're going to survive, you
Yeah.
know?
Hmm.
And I got offered to be a full-time teacher at my school 2 weeks prior to the writer's strike. And, I just love it so much. And so I was like, yeah, sure. And then the writers went on strike, and I was like, oh, thank you, God, that I,
Yeah.
was given this opportunity, because I actually also really love it. But I don't know what I would be doing if it was not for that.
Yeah. So something I know with the writers with the SAG-AFTRA strike, performers can promote future, past, or present work that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So what I also find interesting, and I don't know if this is like a SAG-AFTRA thing, like I noticed that performers aren't promoting stuff, but I noticed like Entertainment Weekly is like posting things on social media about like film and television that's coming out or that's currently out. Is that, and they're like putting out interviews that they have with performers who, clearly are SAG-AFTRA. How does that affect the SAG-AFTRA strike? If it's not the
So
performer themselves, but they gave like a past interview.
the entertainment reporters, even if they are SAG-AFTRA,
Hmm.
their contract is not, our broadcast reporting contract is not being struck. It's just the TV theatrical contracts.
Okay.
And also, as long as the actor conducted the interview prior
Hmm.
to us issuing the strike, those interviews can still be aired.
Okay.
The actor themselves cannot repost, they cannot talk about that interview, they can't continue to do interviews. But as long as that was done in accordance with the strike order, so it was done before midnight of
Yeah.
the day that we started, which I think was July 14th, then they can absolutely continue to air those. We just can't do any new interviews or any new promotion, except there have been some interim contracts given for promotion, as long as they're completely independently distributed and they were independently financed. They have no no fingerprints again from the AMPTP company, they are issuing those waivers. There's also film festivals that are not sponsored by an AMPTP company that our members can still go and promote their work, their independent work, through those festivals. And I don't believe that the writers have, they don't have the same contract that we do about promotion.
Yeah.
A lot of them have just chosen not to, but they don't have the same rules that we do, because their image and likeness is not usually at the forefront.
Yeah. And also just want to point out too, because I follow like a certain director on Instagram. She's been posting about a film she does have coming out, and she's a director, so that is allowed.
Yes.
So
and the directors already signed their contract. They made a contract with the AMPTP and they signed it, and so they can do whatever they want. It's preferred that they also didn't, cross our picket lines, but they are also beholden to whatever contract that they've been given too. So just like during the writer's strike, when actors were still going to set, we actually have an anti-strike law. We are not allowed to choose to go on strike or to say that like we're not gonna show up to work. I mean, some extremely wealthy people can say, no, I'm not coming. I'm not going to show up to work today because the writers are on strike and this is a WGA project, because they can incur the fines and not suffer any penalties or anything like that. But the average actor wouldn't be able to afford that, and we do have a no strike law. It's the labor unions are very specific about what we are and aren't allowed to do in the event of other unions striking. The Teamsters can do whatever they want. The Teamsters can be like, we're not coming to work, and we can strike when anybody else strikes, and we cannot come. And they have that written in their contracts. The Teamsters are a very, very powerful union, and they've been extremely supportive of both the writers and the actors. But yeah, the Directors Guild, they signed their contract. They ratified their agreement, so they can do whatever they want.
Yeah. Is there anything that you hope will come out of this strike? Or, I mean, obviously you want all these things to be met, but like you personally, like what are you hoping for?
I'm also kind of hoping that the indie market sees a resurgence. I could be wrong about this, but I think that there was a company called United Artists back in like the 80s and the 90s that was mainly from actors and writers and producers who were kind of like, hey, we're done being taken advantage of and having all of our work be exploited by companies that don't want to pay us any part of like the success of it. And so they sort of formed their own little thing, and they became a pretty great, powerful little, production studio. And like we're seeing with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's new studio, where they are allowing every single person who was involved in the making of a movie to benefit from its success. I hope that we start to see more of that. I hope that, that agents and managers actually call their clients when an indie production calls and says, hey, would your client like to read this script? I think that they're much more open to it right now, because that's the only thing that their clients can work on. But, I follow an actor on Twitter. We follow each other, and he posted that he had an actor reach out to him after they saw his movie at a film festival and said, oh my gosh, I would love to be in something like this in the future. And he goes, we offered you that lead role, and your agent said, no, he's not going to do it, pass. And he was like, what? I never heard this.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the agents and the managers they're very, very busy. They're overworked. I mean, honest to goodness, my agent manager call me at like 10 o'clock at night sometimes. Like, they're still working. So I can completely understand that some of these people just don't have the time and the bandwidth. But I do hope that something that comes out of this is sort of an awareness of the art that the indie filmmakers are doing and creating, that can really, tell amazing stories. Like, imagine if Parasite never got made because, that company didn't receive XYZ. I mean, like, films like that are a miracle, and it won an Oscar.
Yeah. And it was
amazing.
Film. Yeah.
It was great. It was a foreign movie, And you don't get to see a lot of that in the States because you do have to have cast contingent financing. So I hope that some of these bigger named actors, and I'm not talking about Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is not going to go work on a $565,000 movie because he's Tom Cruise. He doesn't have to. But I do hope that like some of these really talented, bigger named actors start to give the indie market a chance, because I think that there's some really great art that can be made and that would be missed out on if they don't, for whatever reason, get that name that ticks that box that gets them to the distribution that they need.
Yeah. So for those listening, if you want any more information about the strike and the do's and the don'ts, where can they go to look?
We have a website set up exactly for this, and I'm going to tell you, it's SAG-AFTRA
Yes, I was on it today looking at it. So, and
yeah,
there's also there's even a chart of what they asked for and what was said no to, or like what they're like, you want this, we'll give you this instead. So it also has like the do's and don'ts on there, frequently asked questions, how you can help SAG-AFTRA. So support the strike, you guys. And Austin, thank you so much for, I was again just sitting here. I'm like, this is so fascinating to me. And again, like I just didn't, you think some of the stuff, and then you get really into more details about it, and it's really fascinating and also kind of sad at the same time.
Very sad. And I mean, I didn't even touch on so much of what's been messed up about our industry for so long. So I'm really hoping that we get a little bit of leverage back with.
Want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, just like the experimentalness of HBO. We're still getting paid nothing for those shows that cost gajillions and gajillions of dollars to make, and actors are still being paid. I mean, like, I did 2 episodes of a really big series, one of their most popular series. I have not had a residual that has exceeded $10.
Wow.
Ever. And this stuff is not experimental. It's especially not experimental if the CEO is being given tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, stop paying that one dude so much.
It's not experimental if you know what you have is working. And, something like HBO, where they had a show that now has like a second chapter, know what you have, and it's successful 20 years later. So it's not, and you also have these subscriptions, which, if they're talking about ads, and, some of the subscriptions you could pay for without ads. And it's like, where is that money going for? Like, you're getting all this money from people who are subscribing. Like, where is that money going?
Yeah. And, people are watching less regular cable television, but in some ways they're still watching it. It's just on these streamers. So it's really frustrating. And, they're also doing all these workarounds where they used to have series regulars that would, if you're a 10 out of 13 or a, 22 out of 26 episode series regular, and now they're doing away with a lot of the series regular roles. And they're just, because we were so tired of being held for years and years to see if a second season was going to happen or XYZ. They made it so that there's like a cap. Like, if you're not paying the actor this amount of dollars, then you have to allow them to be able to go do other shows. So therefore they just said, okay, cool, we're going to make everybody a recurring guest star, and we're going to pay them $9,800 instead of $40,000. And, big name actors are now recurring guest stars on these series because they didn't want to not allow us to do work in that 2-year interim where we were held to an exclusive contract for that show.
Yeah.
So it's, it's a very, very layered issue that, I think that we're finally just starting to scratch the surface of. I mean, even my agent and manager are reaching out to me going, hey, this is happening. This is happening. This is happening. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me this like months ago so that I could have like talked to somebody on the negotiating committee about this? Cause I'm not on the negotiating committee.
Yeah.
But it's, it's finally kind of coming to light. And I think actors are finally paying attention to what's happening in their business, not in the overarching show business, but in their individual business, and going, hey, what does this mean? What does that mean? Like, what am I signing? What am I signing away? You
Yeah.
know? And so I do like that so many people are getting educated on the issues. And, I posted a little bit about this last week, but I've been an artist since I'm in kindergarten. It's been a part of my whole life. I was an art major from UNC Chapel Hill. And if I know anything, it's that artists always find a way to make their art.
Hmm.
So I think that we'll see something a little bit different. I think that there's going to be a contraction in definitely the television industry as we have known it. There's not going to be 8,000 shows on the air anymore. I think that we're going to kind of go back to where we were
Yeah.
maybe 10 years ago, where there was, you know, 200 shows on the air.
Hmm.
But I also think that we're going to see some really creative stuff come out from independent producers, and we're going to find a way to independently distribute it. And I think that there's going to be a lot of creativity happening
Yeah.
in this next little bit, because we can't, I mean, artists are wild and we're crazy and we can't stop.
Yeah.
So we'll find a way.
Yeah. So before we end our convo, is there anything you want the listeners to take away from this?
The power of humanity, and trying to look out for your fellow human being,
Mhm.
and really supporting artists. Everybody wants to consume art, but rarely do people want to pay for it.
Yeah.
And it's realizing that we're not all giant bajillionaires living on a yacht. Like, a lot of us are living in a 2-bedroom that we rent, or a 1-bedroom that we rent, and we live on the public's contributions to supporting our art, be that through buying the tickets to go see a play or go see a movie, or to, pay your cable bill or your streamer bill or whatever. Please don't participate in piracy. Support the artists. Like, we're just like you guys. We just go to the grocery store and try to buy our chicken and make it at home, just like you guys. So just really recognizing that, like, we're not a bunch of millionaires complaining. We are working class people who are just trying to make a living.
Well, Austin, thank you so much for coming on and chatting all things SAG-AFTRA strike. I mean, I personally feel like I'm more educated now, and hopefully for those listening, do feel that they've gotten a lot more information and insight into the strike. And again, if you do want to learn more, it's sagaftrastrike.org. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay. And you can again donate to the SAG-AFTRA. You can donate to the entertainment fund. And if you have any questions, I'm sure you can reach out to Austin via social media
absolutely.
and take her class in LA. Learn how
Yeah,
to.
come to the Ruskin School.
Yeah, there you go. Well, thank you. So you can stay on once I'm done. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Thank you, Austin, so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.